For the last 25 years, the Malaysian economy has been neither here nor there largely. We have experienced a period of time between 1988 to 1997 when there was an economic takeoff. So around that less than 10-year period, the size of the GDP grew on double. And there were many who experienced that period of time, felt that things were really suddenly going very well. Of course, that stopped in 1997 with the Asian financial crisis. 1998, Anwar Ibrahim was sacked as Deputy Prime Minister, and that set off a series of political crises. And in 2001, China joined WTO. So when China joined WTO, most of Asia's manufacturing investment went to China, the bulk of it. And we were neither here nor there. But now we are seeing a period of very interesting happenings. We see a lot of inquiries, we see a lot of investment into manufacturing sector in Malaysia and around the region. And I think this is a new period of time that may last maybe 10, 15 years, in the sense that we see corporations relocating, or at least keeping China's operation in China, but relocating their Asia hub to Southeast Asia. And this period of time, I think, is not just in Malaysia. Malaysia alone cannot take the entire load out of China. But we are going to see a lot more manufacturing activities. And these manufacturing activities, hopefully, eventually, will lead to the rise of a Southeast Asian middle class. If you look back to China, when China joined WTO in 2001, it has only about 100 million middle class. Today, China has 400 million middle class. So we can envisage that if we do it well, this may be a period of time where we will see the emergence of a Southeast Asian middle class. And when there's a Southeast Asian middle class, then Southeast Asia is not just a production site, it is also a consumer site. And I hope that gives you the overall thinking that we are working on, and I'm happy to take questions in the dialogue. Thank you.
Basically, also focus on one thing, the new industrial master plan.
Yeah, sure.
I think that everybody's been asking about it, so
Sure.
they would like to know more about it.
Sure. The new industrial master plan takes a slightly different approach, or well, whether you want to say drastically different approach from the previous one. Now, we had our first industrial master plan in 1986, and subsequently the second industrial master plan in 1996, and the third industrial master plan, which was supposed to last for 15 years, which started in 2006 and supposedly ended in 2020. However, we also realized that there was COVID in 2020, and there were multiple drafts being worked on but being shelved. So when Tunku Zafrul became the minister in December last year, we looked at it and we decided to take a different approach. The previous industrial master plan took a sectorial approach, but we want to build a layer on top of sectors. We wanted overarching framework of missions, taking a leaf from European Green Deal, taking a leaf from some of the new development in the United States and around the world. We wanted to see that the industrialization in this country over the period of next 7 years to come, we wanted to actually gear towards completing or accomplishing some missions. And the missions are as follows. Mission 1, increasing the complexity of our economy. We have been playing at the low productivity, low wage, low growth game for quite a period of time. So we have been heavily dependent on unskilled foreign labor, and we have not been doing sufficient value adding in our industrialization over the period of last 10, 15, 20 years. And as Prime Minister Anwar identified in his Economy Madani speech, investment as a ratio to GDP has also fallen. During the heydays of Malaysia's first economic takeoff, 40% of GDP were constituted by investment. Over the period of last 25 years, particularly over the last 10 years, only about 20% of GDP was constituted by investment. A lot were actually that few domestic consumption. So we have been in a vicious cycle. So mission 1, increasing economic complexity. Mission 2, we call it tech up, technological upgrade. What we mean by this is that, number 1, we want to see a lot more automation. Number 2, we want to see a lot more digitalization. And we also want to see a lot more general adoptions of technologies and hopefully leading to innovation. So mission 2. Mission 3, pushing for net zero, climate change. Within the Malaysian context, many people see that green transition is a cost to the industry. But for a European audience, you will know that it is both potentially a cost, but potentially also an investment opportunity and a source of growth. So we want to see it in that sort of mindset. Instead of seeing this as a cost, we see it as a potential investment opportunity and potential growth sector. The 4th mission is economic security and economic inclusivity. We have gaps in wealth in the country. We have gap in income. We have gaps in regions. And these are all potential problems that will give rise to populism, that will give rise to a divided society. So we also want to ensure that growth, particularly growth in manufacturing sector, will produce more jobs for women. It will produce more opportunities for local industry, domestic industry, and also for industry, not just in the major industrial centers, but also other parts of the country. And importantly, growth in manufacturing should produce much better paid jobs for Malaysians. We have a peculiar situation in Malaysia. In most other countries, manufacturing medium wage would be much higher than medium wage because the manufacturing sector conventionally is the most advanced sector of all countries. But we have our peculiar situation is that manufacturing medium wage is lower than medium wage. Medium wage in 2022 was 2424, 2,424 ringgit. But manufacturing medium wage was 2,205 ringgit in the year of 2022. So it really means that we need to restructure all this, and we hope that we can accomplish these 4 missions together. We're looking at multiple industries, sectors. Of course, Malaysia is huge in semiconductor, and we want to move up and also move to expand. Both expanding what we are doing. We are doing a lot of packaging and testing. We want to move into doing a lot more advanced packaging, but we also hope to do IC design. We hope that we will have a fab in the years to come, so that to move Malaysia into a more prominent. I think we are quite prominent globally, but we are doing a lot of back end in semiconductor. We think that we can do quite a number of things that has something to do with chemical and petrochemical, new materials, new fuel. We want to go into clean energy. We want to go into EV. We think that we are in a unique position to do quite a bit in aerospace. The aerospace industry is scattered, but with some of the trends of the world needing a lot more commercial aircraft, and also with increased defense budget, the world is expanding into building military aircraft. Malaysia is not involved in that. However, we are already seeing trends where some countries which previously building civilian aircraft, they are no longer interested in civilian aircraft, and we are getting some of these spillover contracts. So these are what we are trying to do. We would like investors, we would like Malaysians and also the world to see Malaysia as the indispensable middle in Southeast Asia. Why I say indispensable middle? Think about this. In Southeast Asia, we acknowledge that Singapore is the most advanced economy, most developed economy in the region. But Malaysia is closely following Singapore in multiple criteria. You think about logistics, you think about human capital, you think about English common law framework, you think about a lot of other factors for an investor to consider. Malaysia closely follows Singapore. Then you have the more populous, countries with a lot more labor, a lot more demographic dividend, like Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines. Imagine that the shift away from China into Southeast Asia. None of us can take everything, but it may result in a vertical integration where Singapore, Malaysia, and other countries can form a vertical integration of supply chain. So I've been telling people, I don't want to compete with Singapore. I don't want to compete with Indonesia or Vietnam. I see that there are a lot more opportunities in the years to come to grow together and to grow a middle class in our societies together.
We believe in Malaysia as a regional hub, but when we talk about Malaysia as a market, then we have difficulties to go across the nation.
Yeah.
So we can see that Penang or Johor or yet Sarawak, yes, they have a very good drive, but when we go to Kedah, Belize, and maybe Terengganu, it's not the same.
Yeah.
And especially when we go about urban development, things like that, there is no dialogue. There's no way for us to talk to them.
Yeah.
And not even budgets.
Yeah.
So how can we contribute in the development of Malaysia across the nation to ensure that it's a good hub for the region?
Well, Malaysia, when you think of Malaysia as a market, of course, the middle class is scattered in the major cities, and you don't actually have widespread wealth across the nation because we have been adopting a development model over the last 20 years that is neither here nor there. I hope in the years to come, we can move up with the help of foreign investors, but also with a very clear intention to create a middle class. Once there is a middle class in this country, there will be wealth being shared and it will be a good market for everyone. There are many people who complain that, we can't find talent in Malaysia. Okay. I kept telling them, I said, Malaysia has no talent problem. Malaysia only have a pay problem. Because most employers would not want to accept the reality that the Malaysian labor market and the Singapore labor market is essentially a single labor market. Because people who do not like the Malaysian labor market will walk with their feet literally across the bridge. So my constituency is in Johor. So every morning, 50,000 Malaysians are on motorbike going to Singapore to work at 2,000 Sing dollar level. These are below 2,000 Sing dollar level, which of course now because of the currency, it translates into much higher pay. But generally, most Malaysians, if you ask them, how much are you prepared, how much if we pay you that you'll be prepared and accept to stay in Malaysia instead of going to Singapore? Very, very commonly they'll tell you, you pay me 2/3 of Singapore pay. I'm prepared to stay back. But Malaysian employers have a problem because they think that these two are not connected. Therefore, we are only prepared to pay 1/3 of Singapore pay. You think about the technician level. We are losing technician not to Singapore in the south, but here or further north. Companies are losing technician to Grab and Foodpanda. I mean, you do an exit interview with your staff. Whenever they leave, they'll tell you they decided not to work for factory. They are going to be Foodpanda. They're going to be Grab driver. I think many of you can attest to that. So that is a wage gap that we will have to deal with. And of course, there are many ways to skin a cat. I've been telling industrial park operators, I said, please don't build industrial park with only foreign labor quarters. You must start building quarters for engineers, Malaysian technicians, so that become an incentive for Malaysians to stay back and not work in Singapore. Say, for example, factories say from 1/3 of Singapore pay, I can only reach half, because otherwise it will be too disruptive. Fair. Then we will have to think of other ways to incentivize workers so that they don't have to cross the bridge or cross the causeway to go to Singapore. Now, once you think in this way, instead of benchmarking wages with Indonesian wages or Vietnamese wages, you benchmark with European wages, you benchmark with Singapore wages, you'll find that Malaysia is very affordable. But of course, that requires a mindset shift.
Well, following all this, which is true, we are seeing actually something happening in Johor. A lot of people from Singapore moving to Iskandar Putri.
Yeah.
And Iskandar trying to be the center of attention for investments in ESG and digital transformation and so forth. What can we do? What is the narrative that we shall send to potential Spanish investors to come to Southeast Asia and then to stay in Malaysia? Because we have a lot of competition, not only Singapore, but yet Indonesia, Vietnam, or Thailand.
Because I'm in Johor, I always tell people I do not want to see Malaysia having a competitive narrative with Singapore. I am not into saying that we are competing with Singapore. I'm saying that we want to work with Singapore and we want to create secure supply chain that includes Singapore, Malaysia, and maybe to a certain extent, maybe Vietnam and Indonesia. If you look at the semiconductor supply chain, you look at the semiconductor industry, essentially it's Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam. And in other industry, it may be Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. But anyway, we are seeing a lot of changes over the last few years in our thinking. And in the thinking of the Malaysian government and also in the thinking of the Singapore government. For the longest of time, Singapore didn't need a hinterland. Why? Because during the hyper-globalization period, Singapore was a financial hub. It was a financial hub. It doesn't need to show you, the investor, a supply chain. Because companies are moving money on computers in the cloud and also moving container boxes around the world in a just-in-time framework. Today, as you would attest, you are also, at least half of your brain is in a just-in-case mentality. So we are no longer in a purely just-in-time mentality. We are also thinking about building redundancy, building resilience. In such context, the Singapore government increasingly discovered that they do need to show investors that there is a link, there is a supply chain, there is a way for executive like yourself to see your factories within 2 hours or 3 hours flight. Now, of course, there's no better place than Johor, where if there's no traffic congestion on the causeway, you can reach within 40 minutes, 30 minutes. But of course, if there's a traffic jam, then you multiply by whatever times. So, but the point is, we are in a different world. And in a different world, different period of time in the world, when we talk about supply chain resilience, Malaysia presents a very strong case. We present a very strong case because whatever Singapore has, we has with a higher price compared to the previous framework. But also, Malaysia has land. Malaysia has a very strong, relatively hungry SME. Maybe not everyone is very capable. There may be capability gaps, but there is a potential supply chain with a lot of already very strong capability, particularly in precision engineering. Okay? There are many fabrication houses of varying qualities and capabilities, some of which are very, very good. Some of the precision engineering companies in Penang is of world quality. They are building factory machines, they're building factory lines in Penang for global companies which they cannot disclose. But the point is, Malaysia has that supply chain which can provide and also supply to companies, apart from having everything else that can support an Asia hub for European companies. Increasingly, I meet investors and they are sharing with us. They used to have their Asia hub in China. Now China is for China, and they are trying to diversify and set up their Asia hub elsewhere. And increasingly, I find that those who are involved in manufacturing, they will look to Malaysia as a potential Asia hub. Whereas if they are setting up a financial or regional headquarters purely for administrative purposes, I think their mindset is still to set up in Singapore. I acknowledge that. But anything that has something to do with manufacturing, Malaysia presents a very strong case.
Definitely, we are truly believers that Malaysia is our preferred destination for investments. And then just about that, politics plays an important role. They always mention about predictability, political stability. Talking about Johor being the forthcoming king, the Sultan of Johor, how do you foresee 2024 onwards in that particular space?
I would say that we are now at the start of a potential new political order that may last for 10, 15, 20 years. In Malaysia, in the Malaysian history, there were a couple of periods which are distinctively different from other periods. The first political order was between 1957 to around 1969, when the riots happened in 69. That first period of time was characterized by laissez-faire economic policies and with relatively coherent racial politics. But that ended because immediately after the Second World War in the late 40s, many people made babies. So when they make many babies, by late 60s, the babies became adult and they looked for jobs. There were no jobs under a relatively laissez-faire economic policy framework. 1970s onwards, there was a period of time where UMNO became very dominant. However, UMNO also took a relatively interventionist economic approach to bring the Malay rural residents who are young into urban industry, and the industry was dominated by export-led industrialization from early 70s, where Intel started their factories in Penang. And because of that, there was a whole generation of young Malays who became middle class within a period of just 10 years. But that political order, economic order did not last. So by late 80s, Malaysia became more open, even more open to foreign investment, particularly in manufacturing. So we saw a massive growth between 1988 to 1997. Politically, the government went back to become more multiracial from around 1991 up to about 2005. 2005 until 2022 was a period where UMNO was continuously weakened, but my side of politics, Pakatan side, were not able to win on our own. So in 2022, after the election, we came together to form this government. This is still an awkward coalition. However, it has all the potential to last for very long because it has two very important elements in Malaysian politics. A stable government in Malaysian politics required that the government must be able to win across racial lines. None of the government that lasted very long and very sustainable, commanding and able to do things, rely on only one single race. So any government has to be able to withstand challenges. It has to be able to win across racial lines, and also having the support across the South China Sea. We have very important political units in Sabah and in Sarawak. Any government that can actually win across racial lines and across Sabah, Sarawak across the South China Sea, it will be a stable government. Of course, we are also very concerned. We are very concerned about wealth gap, income gap, disparity between regions. These are all potential political problems, which is why to have a stable society, Prime Minister presented his economic Madani framework, and in all our thinking, whether it's the 12th Malaysia Plan midterm review or in New Industrial Master Plan, it is, if you want me to sum it up, it will be really better jobs, better pay, better business opportunity for as many people as possible, or for as many Malaysians as possible, in order to sustain a stable society.
You touch in the geopolitical context, and I think that Malaysia is in the middle of this global situation, and therefore Europe is looking at the Indo-Pacific relations pretty much. The EU gateway, it's a signal of how Europe is looking at this part of the world. But definitely we are looking at Malaysia as a good partner due to the fact that you also defend a similar vision of the Green Deal and so forth. So how can we help you to promote Malaysia for this kind of investments destination back in Europe? Because we are here, we've been the adventurers coming over, but there are still a lot more there to come. What can we do to promote Malaysia in Europe and in Spain, of course?
I was part of this delegation that hosted the German president this year. And in the private conversation, he said, because this was the first visit by a German president or chancellor in about 25 years. And the private conversation was very interesting. He said, Europe suddenly discovered there's Malaysia and Malaysia's capability. Because I think for the longest of time, when the attention was on China, particularly manufacturing, when the attention was on China, Malaysia is not distinguished or neither special. But when everyone starts zeroing in on Southeast Asia, when people start landing in Malaysia and landed to look at the region, then they will say that Malaysia is an indispensable middle, that you have to do deals here in order to get manufacturing going. So that I think broadly is my framework of framing. When everyone zero in on Southeast Asia, Malaysia has a unique space. Secondly, when it comes to geopolitics, Malaysia and Indonesia are the two most non-aligned countries in Southeast Asia. I've always hoped, my former position was Deputy Defense Minister. So I spent a lot of time thinking about geopolitics. I talked to many people about geopolitics. We have always hoped to have a stronger tie with EU, because we do not want a binary situation in Southeast Asia. We do not want to just see Southeast Asia as a site for US and China to have their rivalry manifested in the region. What we do not want is a binary situation. We are more prepared and more ready and more welcoming of a multipolar situation, of which EU pay a lot more attention to Southeast Asia and work very closely with particularly Malaysia and Indonesia, because these two nations has a manifested non-aligned foreign policy posture, whereas others are relatively aligned to either side. It is very difficult to maintain the middle ground. Politically, particularly geopolitically, it is very difficult to stay in the middle, because you are either squeezed by both, or you become a platform for both to transact, and we stay as a middle ground. So we appreciate, and we also hope that EU and European countries appreciate Malaysia's and Indonesia's foreign policy posture and see this as an advantage for more interactions.